Kim checked her watch as she pulled into the parking lot of the Quick Mart gas station. 10:55 p.m., just in time for her graveyard shift. She let out a weary sigh, dreading the long night ahead. Working overnights was brutal, but the extra pay helped make ends meet as a struggling college student. She pushed open the door, the bell jingling as she entered. Her co-worker and friend Zack looked up from behind the counter. "Hey, you're right on time," he said with a friendly smile. Zack was a few years older than her, a good-natured guy always trying to make the best of the crappy overnight shifts. "Yeah, let's just get this over with," Kim replied, tying her apron around her waist. "Any issues so far tonight?" Zack shook his head. "Nah, it's been dead. You know how it is, just a few stragglers getting gas and cigarettes so far." The hours ticked slowly by in the empty gas station. Kim restocked the cold drinks and snacks, while Zack did paperwork and tidied up the bathrooms. A few solitary customers came and went, but otherwise it was a seemingly normal, uneventful night. Until around 3 a.m., that is. A rusted old pickup truck pulled up to the pumps, the driver's side door swinging open with a creak. A rough-looking man stepped out, his overgrown beard and dishevelled clothes giving him the look of a hardcore drifter. He shot a long look through the glass at Kim before grabbing the gas pump nozzle. Kim felt her pulse quicken as the greasy man kept glancing her way through the window. She moved closer to Zack behind the counter. "That guy out there is giving me the creeps," she whispered. "Keep an eye on him." Zack squinted through the glass. "Yeah, he seems pretty off." The man finished pumping his gas, then headed inside. The bell clanged as he shoved open the door, not even attempting to muffle the loud crunch of his heavy boots on the tiled floor. He slowly approached the counter, his beady eyes flicking back and forth between Kim and Zack. "How much for the gas?" he growled in a gravelly voice, the foul odour of stale cigarettes and whiskey wafting off him. Zack swallowed hard but stayed calm. It was $22.50 for the pump you used, sir." The man reached into his tattered coat, pulled out a wad of crumpled bills, and slapped them down on the counter, not even bothering to count out the correct amount. "Here," he spat. Kim grabbed the cash and began counting it with trembling fingers, her eyes flicking up at the creepy man. "You only gave me $19 here." In a flash, the man reached over and grabbed Kim by the wrist, his thick sausage-like fingers clamping around her arm like a vice. She cried out in pain and fear as he pulled her halfway across the counter, his grimy face just inches from hers. "Don't get fucking cute with me, bitch," he snarled, his hot, foul breath making Kim gag. "You'll take what I give you and like it. We clear?" "Hey, get your hands off her, man," Zack shouted, slamming his palm down on the panic button under the counter. The drifter slowly turned his head toward Zack, his wild eyes burning with fury. In one sudden motion, he released Kim's arm and lunged across the counter at Zack, tackling him to the floor with a bone-crunching thud. Kim screamed in terror as the two men grappled and punches flew, gradually moving their brawl toward the aisles of snacks and drinks. Forcing herself to stay calm, she scrambled for the phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. "Hello? Police? We've got a maniac at the Quick Mart on Route 9. He's attacking my co-worker. Please, her—" A blood-curdling crash cut her off as the deranged man slammed Zack headfirst into a glass refrigerator case, shattering the door in a spray of glass and spilled soda. Kim froze in horror as Zack slumped to the floor, dazed and dripping blood from his skull. The drifter slowly rose to his feet, his large frame silhouetted by the fluorescent lights. He turned toward Kim, almost seeming to enjoy the shock and terror on her face. He took a step forward, his boots crunching on the shards of broken glass. Kim's whole body trembled like a leaf as she tried to finish her call. Hurry, please! This psycho is going to kill us!" The line went dead as the man grabbed the receiver cord and gave it a vicious yank, ripping the phone right off the wall. Kim gasped and dropped the useless phone. "Now why'd you have to go and do that?" the man snarled, stalking toward her from around the counter. "Now we can't have any interruptions while we get acquainted." Kim opened her mouth to scream, but no sound would come out. Her entire body felt like it was made of lead, her mind paralyzed by stark terror. She could do nothing but watch helplessly as the towering, filthy man reached for her. Something small and hard suddenly smacked against the man's skull from behind. He staggered forward with a pained growl, spinning around to see Zack propped up against the wall, his face a bloody mess, but his eyes burning with rage. "Get away from her," he gasped, clutching a smashed can of Pringles that he'd used to strike the giant man. With a feral roar, the drifter grabbed a nearby metal shelving rack and flung it at Zack like a casual discus toss. The heavy metal slammed into Zack's chest, pinning him to the wall as he let out a sickening wheeze. He slumped to the floor, the life draining from his eyes. "No!" Kim shrieked in horror. She blindly grabbed anything within reach, bags of chips, bottles of soda, even a roller hot dog grill, and began heaving them at the madman with all her might. Most of her wild throws missed or simply bounced ineffectively off his hulking form, but one shattering bottle finally hit him square in the forehead. He bellowed in rage and pain, clutching his brow as blood streamed down his face. Kim seized the opportunity to run, sprinting as fast as she could toward the storage room door behind the counter. Just as she grabbed the knob, an iron grip seized her by the hair and wrenched her back with brutal force. Kim slammed into the counter, the wind knocked clear out of her. With sickening horror, she saw the man standing over her, a large shard of broken glass clutched tightly in his fist. She tried to crawl away, but he grabbed her leg, dragging her back across the counter. Kim kicked and screamed and thrashed, but his vise-like grip was unstoppable. She felt the cold, hard counter pressing against her cheek. Hot tears of panic and desperation streamed down her face as she watched the man rear back the jagged glass shard, preparing to plunge it into her. Suddenly, the man grunted out a ragged gasp. An expression of shock and confusion rippled across his grisly features as he swayed back and forth. That's when Kim saw the large pool of dark liquid quickly spreading across the floor from under his feet. He gurgled and collapsed backwards with a sickening thud, his body convulsing as a rapidly growing puddle of his own blood surrounded him. Kim scrambled up and saw Zack, still barely conscious and propped against the wall. His trembling hand clutched a large hunting knife, slick with fresh blood. With the last of his strength, he had stabbed the man through the back of his knee, slicing his femoral artery open in one brutal stroke. The drifter gasped and gurgled as his eyes rolled back in his head, his life quickly draining away along with the ever-widening puddle of crimson surrounding him. Kim rushed over to Zack, tears streaming down her face. She grabbed him in a fierce embrace and pulled him close. What do we do?" she sobbed, clinging to him in a state of shock. "Call 911. Zack's voice was barely a whisper. His eyes fluttered slightly as his breathing became more ragged and laboured. Kim grabbed her phone with trembling hands and redialed 911, her voice quavering with panic and fear. Please hurry. My friend is hurt, and there's a dead man on the floor. Oh, God." She clutched Zack tightly, his blood soaking through her shirt. Police sirens could be heard wailing in the distance, gradually growing louder. Kim forced herself to look around at the utter carnage surrounding them. Shattered glass, pools of blood, overturned shelves and smashed merchandise littering the gas station floor. She felt bile rising in her throat at the thought of what could have happened if Zack hadn't fought back against that deranged animal. Soon, the flashing red and blue lights of multiple police cruisers flooded the parking lot. Burly officers swarmed in with weapons drawn, quickly assessing and securing the bloody scene. Paramedics rushed to Zack, gently prying him away from Kim to get him stabilized and onto a stretcher. After giving her statement to the police, Kim was checked over by the EMTs and given a shock blanket to wear. She sat on the back bumper of an ambulance, her mind spinning as she replayed the horrific events over and over. Detectives soon arrived and began meticulously combing over the crime scene evidence. They identified the dead man as Carl Jensen, a vicious drifter with a long rap sheet of aggravated assaults, robberies, and one suspected murder. Surveillance footage showed him pulling up to the gas pumps, then launching his unprovoked and sadistic attack on Kim and Zack when they wouldn't accept his short payment. While sifting through Jensen's truck, one of the investigators made a chilling discovery. A large hunting knife and ropes were stuffed under the front seat. It appeared Jensen had nefarious intentions that went far beyond a simple gas station robbery. He had likely planned to abduct one or both of the night attendants before meeting his grisly end at Zack's hands. After 2 long days of hospitalization, observation, and questioning, Kim was finally allowed to return home. Her parents insisted she temporarily move back in with them, fearful of letting their daughter stay alone after her traumatic brush with death. But even surrounded by family, Kim had never felt more alone. Each night, her memories of that fateful graveyard shift replayed in vivid nightmares, the sights and sounds haunting her at every turn. The crazed look in Carl Jensen's eyes as he smashed through the refrigerator door, the sickening crunch of Zack's ribs being crushed against the metal shelving, the depraved grin on Jensen's face as he prepared to plunge the glass shard into her, robbing her of her life in the most brutal fashion. During her restless nights, she would envision how things could have played out differently. What if the police hadn't arrived in time? What if Zack hadn't managed to stab Jensen and he succeeded in... Her mind would race until the panic attacks set in, leaving her awake in a cold sweat. Sleep was her enemy now, she felt, as it only welcomed terrifying visions and traumas replaying on an endless loop. Determined to rejoin the living, Kim began seeing a therapist to work through her post-traumatic stress. It was a grueling process, forcing her to recount and relive every horrifying detail of that fateful night. She took anti-anxiety medication to blunt her frayed nerves and constant sense of lingering dread. Though her physical wounds from that night had healed, the emotional scars ran deeper than she could have ever imagined. And no amount of therapy or treatment could undo what she had seen, what she had endured. One cold night, roughly 4 months after the incident, Kim found herself lying awake in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house. Her eyes remained fixed on the faint shadows in the corner, half expecting Carl Jensen's hulking, twisted form to materialize from the darkness. She shuddered, wrapping herself tightly in her comforter. Her gaze shifted to the window, where the inky blackness of the night seemed to smear and press against the glass, threatening to seep inside. A sudden tapping noise made her jolt upright, her heart pounding in her chest. Her panicked eyes darted around the room, settling on the window. A light drizzle of rain pattered softly against the glass. But mixed with the rain, she could have sworn she saw a thick, darkish smear trailing down the outside of the window pane. Inch by inch, over several agonizing seconds, the vaguely hand-shaped smear oozed slowly downward, leaving a faint crimson trail in its wake. Kim felt her breath catch in her throat, her chest tightening to the point of pain. She clutched the blanket tightly to her in a death grip, trying in vain to tear her gaze away from the unsettling display on the window. Just when she felt she could take no more, the lights in her bedroom suddenly flickered and died, instantly plunging her into total, oppressive darkness. Unable to contain her rising panic, Kim opened her mouth to scream, but a large, clammy hand clamped down over it from behind, muffling her cries. She thrashed wildly, kicking and flailing, but another powerful arm wrapped around her midsection and restrained her with crushing force. Hot, rancid breath wafted across the back of her neck as a harsh, gurgling voice spoke from the inky blackness surrounding them. "We aren't finished yet." Kim's eyes blew wide open as she awakened with a hoarse gasp, her entire body drenched in a cold sweat. Sunlight shone through the window, a surefire sign it had all been another hellish nightmare. She let out a shuddering breath of relief, then noticed the flashing light on her night table. Her cell phone showed 12 missed calls and 7 new voicemails, all from Zack's number. Heart pounding in trepidation, she dialed her voicemail box and lifted the phone to her ear, steeling herself. The first message began to play, the unmistakable sound of ragged, strained breathing filling her ear. She froze, feeling the hairs on her arms stand at attention. Kim. Zack's voice was barely above a raspy whisper, pure terror soaking every syllable. Oh God, Kim, please listen. It's happening again. I don't know what's happening. There's something outside the house. I can hear it, scratching and clawing against the windows and doors. I tried calling the cops, but the line is dead. Kim felt her chest tighten, her grip nearly crushing her phone as she listened in escalating horror. It keeps whispering my name. Zack continued in a shaky voice barely above a whisper, calling for me, trying to lure me outside. I think it's him, Kim. It's that sick bastard Jensen, even after we killed him. He's come back for me. Oh God, help. Please, hell. Zack's frantic plea was cut off by a teeth-rattling bang in the background, as if something massive had slammed against the house. A guttural, inhuman snarl erupted over the line, sending ice water surging through Kim's veins. Zack's cries and curses could be heard in a frenzied struggle before the voicemail cut off abruptly. The following message picked up seconds later, with Zack screaming in agony and abject terror, coherent words replaced by the sounds of unrelenting violence and torment. Kim nearly vomited as her friend's torturous screams reached a fever pitch, mixed with the unmistakable wet rending of flesh and bone. And suddenly, silence. Dead silence lingered over the line until one final chilling voicemail began playing, a haggard, pained voice speaking through what sounded like a mouthful of blood and viscera. He's next. The call disconnected, leaving Kim in a state of sheer shock. She violently vomited on the floor next to her bed, hot tears streaking down her face. With trembling hands, she dialed Zack's number with pure desperation, praying to hear his voice, that this was all some sort of twisted, cruel prank. No answer. Then, through the closed bedroom door, she thought she heard a soft scratching. The slow, languid scrape of something sharp trailing along wood. It steadily grew louder, accented by heavy, irregular footfalls that shuddered the floorboards. Kim felt her heart plummet into the pit of her stomach as the scratching footfalls grew louder outside her bedroom door. She clutched her phone like a lifeline, her whole body paralyzed by sheer, primal terror. The metallic stench of fresh blood seemed to seep through the cracks around the doorframe. A deep, gurgling rasp sounded from the other side of the door. Kim! It hissed in a sickening parody of Zack's ruined voice. Open the door. Bile flooded the back of her throat as Kim shrank further back against the headboard of her bed. She opened her mouth, but only a tiny squeak of panic escaped her lips. She clutched the bedsheets around her body as the creature outside let out a reverberating, subhuman growl. I killed him, it seethed in that garbled, unnatural tone. Now you're next. With a sudden, thunderous crash, the door exploded inward in a hail of shattered wood and drywall. Kim shrieked in horror as a massive, hunched figure filled the doorway, silhouetted by the hallway light. Loose shreds of flesh and gore dripped from its towering frame, swaying slightly with each step into her room. Kim felt her bowels loosen as the smell of decay and death overwhelmed her senses. She pulled the sheets up over her face, peering out with just a crack as the abomination moved closer. What she saw made her blood freeze in her veins. Though unrecognizable as the human it once was, The remnants of Carl Jensen's corpse advanced towards her in a grotesque, animated state. His torso was nearly eviscerated, internal organs and viscera dangling and dragging across the floor with every lurching step. Bones and entrails protruded through the tattered remains of his skin, like some unholy science experiment gone disastrously wrong. One of his arms had been torn completely off at the shoulder, leaving a jagged stump of shredded ligaments and tendons in its place. His other hand clutched a wicked foot-long shard of sharpened bone, whittled to a dagger-like point and dripping with foul ichor. Kim let out a petrified wail as the reanimated monstrosity yanked back the sheets and leered down at her helpless, trembling form with the tattered, eyeless remnants of its skull. A gnarled stump of its severed tongue lashed out in anticipation. The entire room seemed to reverberate with an unearthly, subsonic growl that rattled Kim's bones. "My turn," was all the profane thing managed to rasp before lunging forward with its makeshift blade. Kim let out a guttural scream of pure terror, kicking and flailing with everything she had against the hulking, inhuman abomination. Its rancid flesh felt cold and clammy against her bare skin as they grappled across the bedroom. She managed to grab an alarm clock from her night table and smash it against the thing's skull, causing necrotic brain matter to spatter across the sheets. Letting out a watery gurgle of what might have been frustration, the monster grabbed Kim by the throat with its lone hand. Kim choked and gasped, feeling her trachea start to compress under its brutal grip. Suddenly, a deafening blast shattered what remained of the bedroom window as a barrage of high-caliber gunfire ripped through the undead horror. Rotten flesh and entrails disintegrated in a spray of pulp and shredded viscera as the torso was blown apart in a hail of bullets. The iron grip on Kim's throat disappeared as the wheezing, mutilated creature collapsed onto the bed, its amputated hand still feebly twitching. Blinking through the haze of gun smoke, Kim saw 2 police officers rush into the bedroom with smoking rifles raised, quickly sweeping for any other threats. One officer crouched down beside her, easing the trembling, traumatized girl from the soiled deathbed. "Holy shit. Are you all right? What in God's name happened here?" The officer spoke in a tone of shocked disbelief while radioing for backup and paramedics. Kim simply clung to him, her body racked by uncontrolled sobs and shudders of bone-deep horror. She buried her face in his chest, trying to block out the grotesque half-form of Carl Jensen's mutilated remains, the ragged chunks of his putrid flesh still sluggishly dragging themselves across the mattress. For years afterward, Kim would see therapists and counselors to help cope with the trauma of that night. The unexplainable resurrection of her sadistic attacker, brought back as a ravenous, unholy abomination driven solely by its ragged hunger for vengeance. Every retelling would have her reliving the torment and sheer panic as if happening anew. Some nightmares, she came to realize, were not simply fears conjured from our imaginations, but something far more insidious and evil, made flesh to haunt us day and night. No one could explain the metaphysical forces that animated Carl Jensen's long-dead remains, driven by one final vicious act of depravity to torment the surviving victims he failed to slaughter that fateful night at the gas station. Jensen's tainted, decayed spirit would never find rest this side of the grave, it seemed. He was forever damned to the most wretched confines of purgatory, thirsting for misery and pain to inflict on the living. As for Kim, she would spend the rest of her days peering over her shoulder, haunted by unseen spectres lurking in every shadow. The unfortunate price of peering past the veil, our corporeal existence into the dark domains, very few souls dare to even acknowledge. Some horrors, she realized, are simply not meant for human eyes to bear witness.